Alex Schadenberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. The Euthanasia Prevention Coalition is a national group of individuals from all walks of life and beliefs who oppose MAiD. Today we have with me from remote, we have Kelsi Sheren, a military veteran, a business owner, speaker, writer, and social media influencer. Alicia Duncan, whose mother died by MAiD in 2021 based on circumstances related to her mother's mental health. And we also have, who's now also become a worldwide speaker and author and advocate, and Dr. Paul Saba, who's well known as a family physician in Lachine, Quebec. Today we're speaking about Bill C-218, which is a private member's bill that was sponsored by Tamara Jansen to exclude mental illness as being a grievous and irremediable medical condition. This change to the criminal code will prevent persons with the sole condition being a mental illness from being approved for medical assistance in dying, better known by myself as euthanasia. Canada legalized euthanasia by creating an exception in the criminal code for homicide. Therefore, MAiD, or euthanasia, has enabled doctors and nurse practitioners, that is, to poison their patients to death, literally. The issue of MAiD for mental illness brings other questions to the debate, such as, is the request to have their life ended part of a symptom, or is it part of their mental health condition? Is the person fully competent to consent to be killed? Could the person recover with treatment in the near future? I want to share a story with you quickly, one that I received from one of our supporters who wrote. Her name is Catherine, and she wrote, it's been more than 4,600 days since my suicide attempt. Leading up to it, I'd been diagnosed with a cornucopia of mental illnesses. She says, I felt at the time that even if my situation could get better in the future, I was too exhausted to continue to live until it did improve. I had been so highly medicated and sleep deprived that I was convinced, beyond all arguments, that I needed to die to end my suffering. At that time, my suicide attempt resulted in me being unable to attend school. I was unable to sleep through nights, and due to night terrors and psychotic detachment and psychotic detachments from reality. While awake, I experienced almost hourly panic attacks, which wreaked havoc on me. I was underweight. I was exhausted. And she says she wanted to die, but she was happy that her medical practitioners, her caregivers, never suggested that she should be dead. And this is what she wrote. She said, recently I got married and my husband and I are expecting our first child. I was able to finish high school. I got my college diploma. I have maintained ongoing full-time employment. I received the support I truly needed and no longer require medication to live a fulfilling, beautiful life. I cannot remember the last time I had a panic attack. I look forward to the years ahead of me now and enjoy the days as they come, even when I might feel tired or discouraged. I'm so proud of the girl I was who endured so much hardship to overcome that seemingly endless and utterly hopeless pit of mental illness I was trapped in, and I'm so grateful for that medical system that did not suggest and could not suggest that my suicidal desires might have been actually a good thing, something that I should do. I would have sought it wholeheartedly. I am moved to grief when I consider the difference between life and death for me, and that I could have easily had a different outcome. Then she says, Canadians deserve better mental health care than death. Canadians deserve dignity. Canadians deserve more than euthanasia. There are many Catherines in Canada who need the law to protect them, not kill them. I will now turn to Kelsi Sheren to share her message. Kelsi, as I said earlier, is a combat veteran who's dealt with issues related to PTSD post her service to our country. Kelsi.
Thank you, Alex. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelsi Sheren, and I'm here because Canada is standing at a breaking point that most people don't see coming. And for years, veterans and people with disabilities have been fighting for basic rights, screaming from the rooftops that something is wrong. We are not asking for special treatment. We never have, just the chance to get better. And instead, we've been met with a system drifting from how can we help you live to how can we help you die. MAiD was sold to Canadians as a narrow, humane, safeguarded system. Today, it's been expanded toward people who are not only not dying, they're just suffering due to this country's continued failures. This shift was very terrifying from Canada. We now have well over 20 documented veterans who have reached out for help, and instead were offered MAiD. In September, one actually accepted it. I want to make something very clear today. There is nothing more than human rights violations happening right now by this government. The right to life, the right to medical care, the right to meaningful support, all eroded by a government that has decided some lives, and 96% of those white lives are simply too burdensome to protect. Specific groups like Dying with Dignity Canada are at the heart of this push, lobbying to normalize death as a treatment option, waking up every morning trying to get more people to kill themselves, while vulnerable Canadians are left without real choices. In leaked memos that I dropped this week, going back to 2021, we have proof of current sitting MP Elizabeth May, Parliament member and then leader of the Federal Green Party, Adam Olsen, as well as Murray Rankin, all illegally pushed a non-citizen, non-resident, non-tax-paying Canadian to get MAiD. And instead of addressing the conditions that make life unbearable in this country, like the constant trauma, disability, over-immigrants, poverty, our government is making death more accessible than they are treatment. That's not progress, that's moral collapse. The treatments that could actually save lives, like advanced therapies for PTSD, depression, and chronic trauma, remain trapped behind bureaucracy, fear, and political cowardice. Other nations are pioneering recovery, while Canada is pioneering resignation. And while this is happening, closed-door meetings are already underway to expand MAiD even further in 2027. Absolutely no transparency, no accountability, no consent from people who have risked their lives. And anybody, and I mean anybody who speaks out, becomes a target of these organizations. I know this because I have been personally targeted by the government and by the organizations Dying with Dignity pushing this agenda, begging for money to stop people like me and silence us online. I am not alone, and other whistleblowers, veterans, advocates, and disabled Canadians are being discredited, intimidated, or silenced because they expose the truth, that this system is failing and that some people would prefer that we don't talk about it. Offering death to somebody who came forward asking for help is not medical care. It's a betrayal of duty and a breach of fundamental human rights. A nation shows its value by how it treats its most vulnerable. And right now, Canada is sending a message to the world. Your life is optional and your suffering is inconvenient. This cannot continue, not for veterans, not with people with disabilities, and not for anybody else. Canada has chose a different path, one where treatment has become termination, where community replaces isolation, and where hope is considered a responsibility, not an afterthought. Human life is not a budget problem or a line item. Trauma is not a reason to offer a death sentence. Suffering is not an excuse for the government to step back and call it mercy. We need leadership, real leadership, that believes people can recover. We need policies that protect life, not manage death. And we need a healthcare system that actually refuses to abandon its people that it was built to serve. Canada is crossing a line no free country should have ever crossed in the first place. Veterans, the disabled, and people in poverty are being offered death instead of treatment every single day. This government has violated human rights by making MAiD easier to access than care. Groups like Dying with Dignity are the ones pushing it. We have more than 20 veterans. This is no longer compassion. This is state-sponsored killing. And I speak out because I have been targeted by these death cults and this government directly. Others have, and we are not backing down. And a nation that offers death instead of help has lost its way. And I'm here to drag it back. Thank you.
Alicia Duncan became involved with this issue after her mother died by MAiD. Alicia, please share your message.
Good morning. My name is Alicia Duncan, and I am here today as the daughter of Donna Duncan, who died through Canada's medical assistance and dying regime, becoming the first MAiD death in history to trigger a police investigation. A single moment changed the course of her life. A concussion in February 2020 marked the beginning of her mental and physical decline. Over the next 20 months, her symptoms worsened. She became anxious, depressed, and paranoid, turning to the medical system for answers. But test after test revealed nothing. Her weight was dropping drastically with no clear explanation, and with it, her hope of recovery. When she brought her MAiD request to her longtime physician, he refused to assess her, believing she wasn't engaging with treatment. But under the law, he was required to refer her to someone who would. We would later learn from her medical records that she was consuming roughly 800 calories a day, so frail that the two clinicians who assessed her, nurse practitioner Sean Young and Dr. Grace Park under the Fraser Health Authority, interpreted this as a reasonably foreseeable death. Her MAiD procedure was scheduled for 2 days later. But my sister and I saw what the assessors did not, and in a last-ditch attempt to save her life, we provided evidence to a provincial court judge who halted her MAiD appointment to allow for psychiatric assessment. When our mom learned her death had been postponed, she attempted to end her own life and was placed on a temporary involuntary hold in the very psychiatric unit she once managed. She had spent her career as a psychiatric nurse caring for people in crisis, but when she needed care, psychiatrists deemed her capable, despite every indicator of the opposite, and released her, knowing she was returning home to pursue MAiD. 4 hours later, my sister and I received texts from her common law partner. She was gone. There was no chance for a final conversation. We said goodbye to her frozen body in a crematorium, the IV used to inject the MAiD drug still in her arm, inches above the incision from her suicide attempt days earlier. That image became the source of flashbacks, later diagnosed as post-traumatic stress disorder. In the weeks that followed, we searched for answers. What we found was a system with no mechanism for accountability. Her records were contradictory. Another recent overdose attempt had never been disclosed. Self-diagnosed conditions were written as clinical fact. When we brought this evidence to the police, they opened an unprecedented investigation in Canada's MAiD history. But Fraser Health refused to release the MAiD assessment records even to the investigators. The Privacy Commissioner upheld that refusal. The only person legally entitled to request the documents that might reveal whether her assisted suicide was lawful was my mother, and she was dead. Her death compelled our family into advocacy. It has carried her story to the Federal Committee reviewing Canada's assisted suicide laws in 2022, where policymakers confronted the ethical terrain her case laid bare. And earlier this year, it carried that story into parliamentary rooms across the United Kingdom, where lawmakers are studying Canada as a test case as they consider legalizing assisted suicide there. What our family lived through stands as evidence of a law expanding faster than the safeguards meant to keep people safe. 4 years later, we still do not know whether the law was followed, not because the truth is complicated, but because the system is designed to prevent families and even police from finding out. Her case showed there is no requirement for a practitioner to verify a diagnosis for a MAiD assessment, no burden of proof, no consequence when errors end a life, no access to records, no appeal. There is no meaningful oversight. And now in 15 months, Canada is scheduled to expand assisted suicide to those whose sole underlying condition is mental illness. Yet leading experts warn mental illness cannot be declared irremediable. There is no test, no scan, no metric that can say a person's recovery is impossible. Autonomy, the word we hear so often, does not survive in a system where the alternatives are untreated suffering, homelessness, poverty, extensive waitlists for specialists, emergency room closures, or disability payments that do not cover rent. Autonomy collapses when people are forced to choose between pain and death because care simply does not exist. But consider this. If restricting MAiD is viewed as a violation of human rights, then denying Canadians timely access to care must also be understood as a violation of their human rights. My mother's life and her death reveal something we can no longer ignore. A country that cannot reliably provide care cannot responsibly provide death as its substitute. In the coming months, MPs will vote on Bill C-218. If passed, its impact will be profound. It will permanently halt the upcoming MAiD expansion, sending a message that people living with mental illness deserve a meaningful standard of care. To Canadians listening, your voice matters. Call your MP, visit their office, tell them what this issue means to you, because if someone you love is ever in a moment of crisis and approved for MAiD, with no legal recourse to protect them, this moment may come back to you with a question you cannot undo. What if I had spoken up? And to members of Parliament, you are not casting a vote on ideology. You are casting a vote on whether mental illness is met with treatment and dignity or with a state-sanctioned death, and whether stories like my mother's become rarer or more common. History will not remember the talking points or the politics of this moment. It will remember the lives saved or lost because of the choice you made. If Canada is going to defend the right to die with dignity, then we must first defend the right to live with dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you for your emotional and personal story. Dr. Paul Saba is our final presenter. He's a family physician in Lachine, Quebec, who has many years of experience for caring for patients, but also has written a book on this topic. Thank you, Dr. Saba.
As a physician, I've taken an oath not to do harm. Our government is doing more and more harm. Not only have they failed us in our healthcare system, where Canada is considered to have one of the worst waiting times in the Western world, but we're using medical aid in dying, which is really euthanasia, as an excuse and as a reason to save money. Now, I don't make these allegations frivolously. There's a study published this year in Sage Journal, which explored the potential cost savings to governments by expanding euthanasia to include vulnerable groups, and mostly those vulnerable groups include those with mental illness. They also looked at the homeless, drug users, retired elderly, and Indigenous communities. This was a well-done study. They estimated from now till 2047, so it's approximately 20 years, there'd be a savings of $1.273 trillion, with an estimated 2.6 million deaths of patients, mostly who are mentally ill, and the elderly. So they found that it was skewed mostly for the mentally ill. The question I have is, our government, our Canadian government and our provincial governments, promoting and expanding assisted death, including the mentally ill, which will be coming up in March of 2027, for financial incentives? That's a big question, but I think the answer is very clear. They're looking to save money. And this is unconscionable, it's unacceptable, and it's unethical. And as a physician, I refuse to participate in that. So, why can the government do what is unethical, and we're told to be ethical in our practice, except they give us laws that make us unethical? Unethical because they want us to participate in killing people, many who have many years left to live. Because when the law first came out, they were saying, well, when people are going to die in the foreseeable future, you know, it's understandable. They're going to die anyway. And they try to sell us that. But the problem is, with diagnostic errors, 1 in 5 people who are told they have a cancer may not have the cancer. There's errors in diagnostic errors for severe illnesses. And I have examples of that in my own practice. One patient who I saw a number of years ago, we came with a cough, we did a chest x-ray, and the x-ray report showed probably lung cancer. We did a CT scan, same thing. We went on, and at one point he even said to me, Dr. Saab, you know, I know you're opposed to assisted suicide and euthanasia, but you know, I'm not of the same philosophy, and if it's my time, it's my time. But fortunately, I was able to convince him with his daughter to undergo a lung biopsy. We found he had lymphoma, and years later, he's still alive. He was an engineer in his 50s, and this is a little bit over 5 years ago. So there are diagnostic errors, prognosis. And now we're talking, you know, we know that it's like flipping a coin, who's going to live and who's going to die. But despite that, the government went ahead and pushed ahead for euthanasia laws for people seeing their lives ending in the foreseeable future, whatever that means, foreseeable. That was kind of supposed to be a term for terminal illness, but we never know exactly always who is terminal. And then now they expanded it presently for people who have handicaps with years to live, decades to live. I sit on a committee where I review deaths at a major university hospital. And when I look over all the reasons that are given, most of the reasons have nothing to do with physical suffering, because the patients are well controlled with physical suffering. It's isolation. I don't want to be alone. I'm alone. I don't want to be a burden. I don't have the same abilities I had before. And these are the reasons people give, and they're signed up and are allowed to sign up to be euthanized. And now we're going to be going forward to those with mental illness, and we know already that nobody can know who is treatable and untreatable. You know, you're going to have two different psychiatrists say the extreme opposite of, you know, this person can be treated. Another psychiatrist says, no, they can't be treated. And from a legal standpoint, people requesting, they say because they have to volunteer, those requesting medical aid in dying do not meet the condition of free and informed consent because the desire to die in most cases is a symptom of mental illness. Bill C-218, which will be voted later this year in Ottawa, will stop euthanizing people with mental illness as the sole criteria and must be supported by our members of parliament who value life. Otherwise, they're just saying we don't value life, and life is cheap and has no value. Le projet de loi C-218 mettra fin à l'adoption de l'euthanasie, aide médicale à mourir, des personnes atteintes de troubles de santé mentale comme seul critère. Dans la plupart des cas, le désir de mourir est un symptôme de maladie mentale. 90% des personnes qui mettent fin à leur jour sont atteintes d'un trouble mental au moment de leur suicide. La plupart des personnes qui ont tenté ou réussi à se suicider ne veulent pas mourir. Ils veulent plutôt échapper à leur détresse émotionnelle. Selon une étude de Harvard School of Public Health, 90% des personnes ayant tenté de se suicider sans succès ne se sont pas suicidées après le traitement. Avec le bon traitement, le suicide a disparu. I want to say this in English, it's very important. 90% of people in a Harvard study who tried to kill themselves and weren't successful after treatment, after after they were treated because they were treated and they weren't successful in their attempts, they did not want to die. La plupart des personnes atteintes de troubles mentaux ont besoin de soutien psychiatrique, de psychologues et de travailleurs sociaux. Beaucoup vivent dans des situations financières et sociales précaires. Ils ont besoin d'un soutien financier, notamment d'un logement abordable et d'une sécurité alimentaire. Le système social et de santé canadien est déficient pour les personnes ayant des problèmes de santé mentale. Au Québec, le délai moyen d'attente entre la référence à un psychiatre et le traitement est de 5 mois. With this law, where they're going to allow 90 days for waiting time, and in Quebec, when I refer somebody to a psychiatrist, it's 5 months. They'll have had themselves euthanized before they even get to see their psychiatrist. Les psychologues sont rares et rarement accessibles dans le système public. Il est temps que les députés fassent preuve de solidarité et soutiennent les personnes atteintes de troubles de santé mentale. Ils ont besoin de soins, de traitements et de soutien. Ils ne doivent pas être euthanasiés. Les parlementaires doivent mettre fin à l'aide médicale à mourir pour les personnes atteintes de troubles mentaux. Ils doivent voter en faveur du projet de loi C-218 et non pour l'euthanasie des personnes ayant des problèmes de santé mentale.
Thank you, Dr. Sabas. So Bill C-215 will have its first hour debate today in Parliament. It will receive its second hour debate in later February, and it'll be voted on in early March. So we're really hoping that members of Parliament look at this issue properly and recognize the victims who might be dying by euthanasia if this is not passed, and who really needed proper care and not death. Thank you.
Thank you, merci. For the reporters who joined on Zoom, if you have a question, please use the raise hand function. Pour les journalistes qui se sont joints à nous sur Zoom, si vous avez une question, s'il vous plaît, utilisez la fonction main levée. Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci, c'est ce qui conclut cette conférence de presse.
Thank you very much.